When life hits you in the face and you just get a stop sign, do you continue to push against the stoppage or do you look to embrace the new and the unknown? And sometimes it's scary because it's the unknown. Welcome back to Together We Are Stronger, Leadership Straight, No Chaser. And today we have a guest on, Chip Scholz, with us. And looking at kind of what Chip went through and what set him up really to help others in the world of leadership, there was a health situation that came up and kind of forced Chip to look at things differently, kind of say, okay, what do I do to adjust here? And then how do I pass this on to help others out? And Chip, with that situation, what was it that really started this journey and really let me try to have it differently to showcase for individuals so they don't find themselves in the same situation potentially?
Well, thanks, Scott, and thanks, George, and I really appreciate you having me on. It's a real pleasure. I've had a lot of fun talking to you, and look forward to continue that fun. When you live long enough, you experience a lot. And so when you take a look at setbacks, I mean, there's setbacks that hit you every time. Recently, I was asked to speak about how do you handle curveballs, which you can, trade setbacks for curveballs. Life is a curveball.
Hmm.
If you went through 9/11 and you saw the dot-com bubble burst, that was a setback. It may not have had a direct impact on your life, but it had some impact on your life. And for me, I was starting a business right about then, and I couldn't understand, or I was having a hard time getting traction. Instead of blaming the dot-com bust, I blamed myself, and I continued to do that. The Great Recession, 2008, 2010, was certainly along that lines. Even going back further, I used to work for a company in Southern California, and I was laid off in May of '98. We decided as a family to move from Southern California to North Carolina. And so 27 years ago, we packed up a 19-foot travel trailer, packed 3 humans and 2 dogs and 3 cats in a travel trailer, and spent a month and a half on the road driving across, seeing America, doing the Griswold thing. And so, each one of those is an opportunity, but it's also a curveball. I had no idea I was going to get laid off. I had no idea that the world was conspiring at a dot-com bust or a great recession or whatever. Um, and it's all how you handle it. So, the cathartic episode is the stroke, obviously. And let me give you an idea of the run up to it. I weighed 350 pounds. I was traveling 200 nights a year. I was always executive platinum on American Airlines, because I was in Charlotte, so you have to fly American or US Air before that. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, bad diabetes, out of control diabetes, and working 20 hours a day. And yeah, I was successful. Yeah, I was billing a heck of a lot of money. And you do what you do when you're when you're an entrepreneur, you do what you do to make money. And then God gave me a love tap and said, "Dummy, hey, dummy, it's time to start thinking about a different way." So, you can take that in a lot of ways. After the stroke, I was paralyzed on my right side. I did not have full control of my speech. I had aphasia, which is you can't find words. I couldn't text. I could barely tap out letters on the keyboard. I went from reading 2 books a week to not being able to read.
Hmm.
Or I could read maybe a paragraph at most, and with any kind of retention. And so now I had always said that one of my sayings, I've got a couple of sayings, but one of my sayings is failure is not an option. And look, we fail all the time, right? Don't we?
Yes.
We fail all the time.
Yes, we do.
Every day we wake up and something we fail at. Whether it's saying I love you to our loved ones in the morning or whatever it is. But in the grand scheme of things, am I moving forward? Am I getting better today than I was yesterday? And that's what I mean. Failure is not an option. So, over the next 2 years, I lost 110 pounds. I started walking. When I first got over the stroke, I couldn't walk more than a block. And by the end of 2 years after the stroke, I walked 3,500 miles according to the app, because everybody's got to have an app, right?
Yeah.
And I turned it around, and 14 years later, here I am standing still, and I'm talking to you, and I don't have any deficits. Some people would say it's miraculous. I just think it's hard work and perseverance.
So the interesting thing when I look at that, because one of the things that you talked about was like rebuilding from things that stopped working. And we look at a lot of leaders, and it's a weird conundrum that leaders get into where they resist change and they continue to try to work with things that are outdated, things that aren't working for them anymore. And it's just the fear of getting away from their comfort zone, having to embrace something different. And what is that going to look like? And so kind of the journey that you went on, and it had to be rebuilt from the old way that does not work. Like you said, you were like, hey, wake up. And now we have to do something new. We have to embrace new. But with new, we don't know what's on the other side. And are we going to fully trust that that is where life actually takes place? That's where a lot of the growth happens for us. But are we going to let the fear hold us back? And so when you look at leaders, it's a weird conundrum where they're like, I don't want to touch it. I don't want to get away from the old. I know it's not working, but I don't want to go get into the new route because I just don't know.
And that's called confirmation bias. I mean, and there's all these cognitive biases that people use, but confirmation bias is when you take a look at a situation and it's pattern recognition, and you recognize the pattern, and so you make the same decision. But it's more than that. It's more than just, you've heard the definition of insanity, right? Yeah. So my country version of that is, if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. People are rarely the architects of their own change. And so we get stuck in a way of doing things, whether we're a leader, whether we're, um, whether we're somebody who's working as a salesperson, we get stuck in certain ways of doing things. One of the things that's amazing to me is how we are all extremely mentally flexible if we let ourselves be. So, when I talk about mental flexibility, early on in the start of my business, I was working with a company, and I asked, what could I do better? What is it about you, about me, that you like doing business with, etc. Kind of like a mini 360. Um, the guy said to me, he said, "There's more than one way to do things. Be flexible." Out of that came a phrase that I've used. It's called Semper Gumby. Semper is always, right. Semper Fidelis is always well. Semper Gumby. This is Gumby. I love it. I love it. God, that's great. Yeah. So it's Semper Gumby. It's always flexible. And people get a kick out of it when you talk about Semper Gumby. But that is really the way I've lived my life. Is, look, if you get stuck on any one thing, you're going to go down with the ship. Now, some people may say I'm a little bit too flexible, but there are some things that I really believe in. There are values that I hold that aren't going to change. But if my behavior's not working, if it's not getting me where I want to go, I got to change that behavior. Does that make any sense?
No, it makes plenty of sense. It's just,
Yes.
as people are listening, are they grasping that? And that's the thing is, are you open? Do you have an open mind to kind of see things differently? And so right now, if you're getting nuggets from this, hit the like button. If you're looking for these types of videos, hit the subscribe button. And I would, as you're listening to this, as you have curveballs thrown at you, are you flexible to adjust, to say, hey, this is nothing set in stone, I can adjust? But are you going to let yourself adjust, or are you going to stay hard pressed in what's keeping you back and getting pissed off because you're stuck? So that's the one thing as a listener I would ask, and just kind of ponder and see where you're at. So I know, George,
Do you mind if I share something with you?
Please.
There was a stat There was a book that I read several years ago. I think it was called Younger Next Year, and in it they quoted Dean Udell, who had done a study that 90% of heart patients were either back on the table or dead in 3 years because they wouldn't change their lifestyle. Your life is being threatened. You would think that you would want to do something different if your life is being threatened. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yes, it
Anyway,
is. Yeah, I think it's first off, praise God for, what you've gone through and who you are today. You say small decisions shapes lives. And what small decision most leaders overlook actual cost of them the most. That just takes them out.
yeah, it's rarely the big things. My dad said many years ago that their marriages don't die on the big things; they die on the little things.
Mm,
And he was absolutely right. And is staying in that fixed mindset and refusing to change your behavior within that fixed mindset. And there's a lot to that. If we want to change what we're doing, we've got to change what we're thinking. Okay.
exactly.
So, but and that goes back to if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. But you've got to change what you're thinking. You've got to change the way you think. And the small decision is, if I wake up tomorrow morning, what's one small change that will let me know that things are different? And then
That's
if we
powerful.
know that, we can make that small change, and it's the accumulation of the small changes. It's not I'm going to lose 400.
Well, let me add to that. Where do you see leaders quietly drift without realizing it? So, you know, we talked about so many different things, but you have really studied on leadership and things like that. They go through and they quietly drift away without even realizing they're drifting. And I know you've probably seen that, and I know have talked about it. What do you really can you break that down?
There's a couple things. One is, there's a great word, and it's called hubris, which is basically believing your own bullshit.
Awesome.
Yeah, and that's what happens when leaders, because if I'm running a company, and a big company, and I'm having my butt kissed all the day, by vendors, by
Hmm.
people who want things, by employees, because for the most part, most employees aren't going to tell you what you really want or what you need to hear. So if I'm believing that, then I'm going to act in ways that aren't really beneficial. So that's one thing. Second thing is, people, when they become leaders, go from a way of doing to a way of being. And I was talking to a client a little while ago about this, and what we were talking about was similar, but he's an engineer and he's stuck in being an engineer, and
Mm,
yet he's chosen to lead people, but he hasn't become a businessman yet. Now, if you started a business before, you know the difference between being something and being a business person. There is a
hmm.
huge difference. I see it with realtors all the time. Realtors are great realtors and they know everything about real estate, but they don't know anything about business.
Mm.
Mhm.
So it's that process of going from
Yeah.
doing to being. And the ones who can make that jump speed to, their jump to hyperspeed, the ones that can do that are the ones that are going to win. Those are the ones that are
Mm.
going to be able to really make a difference and change things.
George and I laugh at this because we see so many business owners like hard pressed that it's their way or the highway. And then we'll talk to business owners and they think they know what they're doing, but then it's like, I don't want to change. Whatever you're saying is not right. And I'm not gonna have an open mind to receive because I look at it, it's a big fear factor of, well, if I have to question my beliefs, does that mean that it's always been right? And we've highlighted that what has served you up to this point has served you because you've allowed it to serve you. But now it might be time that you need to change it because it's not serving you anymore. And so that's why we're laughing, just because we've seen it so much, and it's a wild thing when like you're aware and you're paying attention, but people that are kind of oblivious and not fully present.
Well, and
Yeah.
that's what I spend my days doing, is talking to people. As an executive coach, I talk to people that own companies, that run companies, that want to be better. I mean, that's why they hire me, is they want to be better. And the ones that don't work out are the ones that say they want to be better but don't want to do anything about it.
So our big foundational piece when we started this was the aspect of clarity and then having your tribe around you. One
Mm-hmm.
thing that you had highlighted was leading without certainty. And it's one that I'm like, that is a very unique part because a lot of us want to be certain, but then it gets to the side that there's so many variables in life and running a business and being a leader that you can't control. They just pop up and you have to kind of adjust accordingly. But without certainty, the clarity, when I look at it, is it helps you kind of
Yep.
direct and keep going. And then
Scott,
when you look at the
this is what we're talking
without
about,
the
Chip.
certainty,
So let me ask you a question real quick. When it comes to wood turning, you talk about this. You can't force the cut in leadership. What does forcing it look like? Now let's talk about that. You talk about wood turning, and when you're sitting with a leader, an entrepreneur that's trying to create something, what do you mean by wood turning? Is that really just restructuring yourself? Could you show Scott what you just showed me of all
Yeah,
the
Scott,
stuff?
this
Yes.
is a lot of the wood turning that I've done over
mm,
time. Those are some of my pieces that I really love. And I make bowls and that kind of stuff as well. So I have quite an inventory of that. And what I've learned, in fact, the book that's coming out in March is called "Every Dog Has Its Day: Reflections on Life, Love, and the Lathe." And so I see things through the lens of wood turning. And when talk about forcing the cut, I use regular tools. I use traditional tools, and you have to sharpen those tools.
Mm-hmm.
And believe me, if you've ever run your finger across the top of one of them, it is razor sharp.
Yes.
What happens is if you're not taking the time to sharpen the tool, if you're trying to go that extra cut and you're producing sawdust instead of these really pretty curls that come off the wood, you're forcing the cut. And so I see the parallels really great in that, when I'm not taking the time to learn, when I'm not taking the time to read, when I'm not taking the time to write, when I'm not taking the time to make myself better, then and this is what I see in other people who never read. I don't know if you've heard the stat, but 57% of college graduates never read another book cover to cover in their entire lives. Isn't that sad?
yeah,
Yes.
I mean, that blows me away. But if you're not taking the time to sharpen, then everything else is going to feel like forcing. And when you force, what happens?
Doesn't
it's not
shape
smooth.
well.
It's not, yeah, it's not
Yeah,
clean.
it doesn't shape well. People get hurt.
Yeah.
It leads to a tired craftsman.
Mm.
Because if you're pushing too hard, then you're using a lot more energy than you normally have to, and just bad things happen. It's just not good things.
Well, when you just brought that up, I was my next question, and you answered it because leaders that push instead of shaping. You just explained the question before I even asked you, and a lot of times people they just push through and not really shape themselves to be the leader they want to be, and it's incredible what people go through.
Yeah, and one of the CEOs that I work with is, God, he's probably the best at pulling rather than pushing.
Mm.
He asks incredible questions. He doesn't have a conversation where he talks at you. He's always talking with you. He's always, he'll always ask great questions. And how does that make me feel as someone that I'm talking to? Well,
Mm.
that makes me feel great because he's asking great questions. Now, as a coach, I ask a lot of questions. So, when he and I talk, we actually have a little bit of a volley of questions that go back and forth. But it's the thing that he runs a marvelous company, an extremely successful company. They're going to clip 3 billion this year, and he's doing a great job.
Hmm.
And
That's
it's
amazing.
because he takes the time. And he knows that he has to be better tomorrow than he is today.
So the question piece is very interesting because I just did a piece of content on this a couple of nights ago, and the fact that people don't understand the power of questions, especially in a leadership role, because if you're constantly telling people what to do, you don't get them to think, you don't get them to start looking and saying, okay, let their brain solve whatever's going on. And so when it comes to the leadership piece, running a business, why does it seem like a lot of people try to stay away from asking questions and instead they get in there and they're trying to direct and tell everybody what to do, and then they overlook the power of asking questions and actually getting people to think?
Well, years of family therapy taught me that the more in control you think you are, the less in control you really are. But here's a guess, and it's a guess based on experience. Imposter syndrome is a thing. If I don't feel comfortable in my own skin, am I going to feel comfortable inviting other opinions? And you were asking about certainty a little while ago. That's kind of the way our world has become, is we want everything more certain. And there is no such thing as certain, And so the more that we feel that we have to be right. There was a great book a couple of years ago, I think it was about 2011, written by Chip Scholz, called Being Wrong. And she says, she did a TED Talk about the same time, and she says that, what does being wrong feel like? And she said that being wrong doesn't feel like anything until you know you're wrong, until somebody calls you on it. And what usually happens, you stick with your wrongness by insisting that you're right. You become defensive. And she said there were three stages. I love this. There are three stages of wrongness. The first stage is if you disagree with someone, first of all, you think they're ignorant. They don't have access to the same information as you do. Then you think, what was the second one? I can't remember what the second one was. But the third stage is you think they're evil because they have access to the same information. They're taking it in a completely different way. And now they're evil because they don't agree with you. Well, it's that whole drive for certainty that we have to believe that we're certain, that causes the defensiveness, that causes the imposter syndrome, that causes us to feel like we need to be more than when we're actually less than.
What does suitability, leadership actually look like? Not in theory, but it's in your calendar and more of a practical and real about it.
Okay, so to me, there is no type that should be a leader. I use a lot of assessments in my work, and there's one in particular, there's a DISC assessment. It's been on the market for a long, long time, and people have talked about it. And it describes people in different ways, somebody that's dominant and direct and goal-oriented. And that's usually what we think of as a leader. Well, I think that's kind of in the TV era, we think of that more as a leader because it's someone who's outgoing and can make a speech and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think there's a type. There's a great book called Quiet by Susan Cain, who she talked about introverted leaders and the power of introversion. And she even claims in the book that introverted leaders are actually better leaders than extroverts. And the reason she says that is because they're more inclusive, they're more collaborative, they're more willing to have the conversation. And she even lays the 2009 financial collapse at the feet of extroverts. That if they had done more research and listened to the experts, we wouldn't have had the chaos that was the economy for 3 years.
There's been so many nuggets that Chip has shared to the audience, and we're laughing because there's certain things that we just see. So it's golden nuggets here. And as a listener, find one nugget, implement it, come back, see what else you're missing because your brain has expanded hopefully to see what you're missing. So Chip, I know you talked about the book, so you have the book coming out. If individuals wanted to purchase the book, and I think you have another one later in this year too, from what I saw, if I read that right. So you have those, and then if individuals wanted to connect with you and go a little bit deeper in regards to what you provide, where is that for them to connect with you ideally?
Well, I'm sure you're going to put it in the show notes, but the website is scholzassociates.com, associates with plural and all spelled out. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on Facebook. I'm just starting to play with Instagram. My YouTube channel needs some work, and Threads. I've been trying with Threads rather than X, but the best way is through the website. And my email address is real simple. It's chip@scholzassociates.com. So it's an impossibly long URL. The books are available on Amazon. There's one that came out in October called Small Decisions, Big Shifts, and you referenced that. Every Dog Has Its Day is coming out in March 10th is being released. And the next one is tentatively called Handoffs, which is a family parable about a logistics company that is having a crisis of leadership. That one was fun to write because it's fiction-ish. It's fiction adjacent. That was fun to write. Also, there are audiobooks of each one. The audiobooks are available right now on Spotify and barnesandnoble.com.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll get all that in the show notes so that way the audience can get in there and easy access and whatnot. Ultimately, though, as a listener, as you're listening to this, I think the biggest thing is having that flexibility, because really being able to maneuver with things that are showing up. If you're very stringent and lack flexibility, you're going to stay stuck. And so if you're looking to go to that next level, find yourself, what's that smallest way that you can make that move to become flexible, to start opening up. So, and then if you're looking for these types of videos, again, hit the subscribe button. But other than that, we appreciate you guys coming on this journey with us, allowing us to be part of your journey, and we'll catch you on the next episode.